If you're curious to hear a little music from our guest Carla Lucero, who we spoke to in our most recent episode, check out E4TT's annual concert of music by women and non-binary composers, Midnight Serenades, on January 25th.
Welcome to For Good Measure, an interview series celebrating diverse composers and other creative artists, sponsored by a grant from the California Arts Council. I'm Stephanie M. Neumann, co-producer and audio engineer of For Good Measure, filling in as host for this episode. Today, we celebrate our 100th episode by interviewing the one and only artistic executive director of Ensemble for These Times and For Good Measure host and producer, Nanette McGuinness. Thank you, Nanette, for doing this interview today. This is a treat. Welcome.
Thank you for suggesting I do this. It had been the farthest thing from my mind when we were putting together the Behind the Curtain season to even be involved. So thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah. Well, to get started, you're an opera singer, a musicologist, and arts administrator, and have had an exciting career in music. Can you talk about your musical journey? When did you know you wanted to become a musician?
So my interest in music started really early. There are pictures of me age 2 or 3 at our family's Hammond organ with my little legs dangling and pounding away, I'm sure very unmusically, at one of the keyboards. And I always did love music. The family sang in the car. My mom taught me to do descant by ear. And so my dad would sing bass, my sister would sing the melody. It was fun. I took organ lessons. After my parents got divorced in high school, guitar lessons, and then I started teaching guitar. And then in junior high and high school, I did musical theater because they did that at my school. So from really early on, I loved music. Whether I was going to have it as a vocation or an avocation was less clear, do something and do music as part of my life, because I was a math, science, history, language kid. And my family, there are no professional musicians in the family, just people who are good at music who do other things. But I guess in the end, the lure of music was too strong. And in college, I started taking voice lessons and I continued my organ lessons, and I decided to major in music. And I got interested in early music, played a bunch of crumb horns and recorders, from tenor to sopranino, and they're F and C instruments. So I actually remember in one concert when I was playing one of the F instruments and all of a sudden forgetting whether I was on the F or C instrument. So that was alarming. So I just had to stop and figure out where I was. So the original plan, what I started out thinking I would do is sing in an early music group and conduct it and do research into early music. And then my voice started to develop, and it was a big operatic voice. And at the same time, I performed in a couple of Baroque operas in grad school with Alan Curtis, who has since passed away, but was really the maven of Baroque performance practice. And I was hooked. So I was like, all right, I do want to sing. So I finished my doctorate and started singing opera. I'd asked my organ teacher in college if I could keep both instruments going. And he said, you won't be able to do both instruments at the level that you want to have a good professional career. You're gonna have to pick. So I picked.
Yeah. I've always loved your operatic voice too. I'm so glad that you picked.
Oh, I didn't know that. Thank you.
Yeah. I always have cherish all the times I've seen you perform. So yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So you were born in Massachusetts, grew up in Houston, went to college in New York, and ended up living in Berkeley, California. Did this affect your career in music interests in any way?
I don't think so, mostly. When I was little, when I was born, my dad was in the Air Force, so we moved around the East Coast a decent amount. And then when he left the Air Force to retrain as a psychoanalyst, and I had been sick a lot, we went to Houston, a warmer climate. And I would say that growing up in Texas was hard for a bright young woman back then. I think it has changed a lot. But then when I went to college, and I knew I wanted a liberal arts education, going to a conservatory wasn't part of the vocabulary for my family. It wasn't even something we would have thought of. And perhaps if I'd grown up, stayed in the East Coast, I would have had a different musical background than what I had. But when I then went to Cornell, I loved Cornell. It was great. And then when I changed over, moved from Ithaca, Cornell, to Berkeley for Cal Berkeley for my doctorate, the ethos was pretty much the same, very similar. So it was almost a seamless transition. I went from one place I loved to another place I loved, both of which were very similar in kind of the overall way. So it felt great, and I ended up staying here.
You have performed in a variety of vocal situations, such as operas, song cycles, art song, chamber groups. Would you talk about your experiences in these different vocal environments and what are the similarities or differences between them? And do you have a favorite?
Well, I love all of it, to be honest. There's
Okay.
so much really great music. Opera is thrilling. The immersion in a role, working with a conductor, singing with an orchestra, it really is a Gesamtkunstwerk. The costumes, the sets, the whole thing. And I've sung in my career a lot of Mozart and Puccini. I ended up being kind of a Mozart Puccini singer, which is great stuff. But I also did some Handel, and I've even done some Wagner, which was also very thrilling. So that's opera, and yet chamber music. Chamber music is really intimate. You embody multiple characters, especially in art song. But in chamber music, you have a very close relationship with the musicians you're performing with, instead of with the conductor as the intermediary. And that intimacy is very nice also. Um, in both of them, in both of them, you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable, to let your spirit and yourself show. But art song is more naked because you don't have any of the accoutrement, the costumes and the sets and all that. I mean, in art song, you can have them in your mind, but you're not actually seeing them and wearing them and looking around. And it requires you to switch gears more quickly often. So I love them. I love them both.
Thank you for listening to For Good Measure, and a special thank you to our guest, Nanette McGuinness, for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the subscribe button, and support us by sharing it with your friends, posting it on social media, and leaving us a rating and a review. To learn more about E4TT, our concert season online and in the Bay Area, or to make a tax-deductible donation, please visit us at www.e4tt.org. This podcast is made possible in part by a grant from the California Arts Council and generous donors like you. For Good Measure is produced by Nanette McGuinness and Ensemble for These Times, and designed by Brennan Stokes, with co-producer and audio engineer Stephanie M. Neumann. Remember to keep supporting equity in the arts, and tune in next week for Good Measure.